Have you heard of the animated show called Pantheon? It's a relatively popular show that directly tackles very relevant issues today of big tech overreach and technology literally consuming the human mind. But it also deals with more abstract concepts that also are very popular these days, like the simulation hypothesis and the technological singularity, which is the idea that technology will eventually turn humans into immortal, all-powerful gods! It's a show that is simultaneously very grounded in current events, but also extremely trippy. I've been wanting to watch it for a while, but it was jumping all over the place in many streaming services. Until a few weeks ago, when I discovered that it had become available on Netflix, and that the story was now basically finished within 2 seasons. It's apparently complete with a beginning, middle, and end, which is fantastic and a unique viewing experience in 2025. I mean, actually getting a conclusion to the story you're watching? Gasp! That is positively unheard of these days. Not to mention that it's an original story and not another bloviated bovine corpse of a franchise being milked to death. And then I finally watched it, and boy do I have thoughts. Judging by the title of this video, you're probably assuming that this will just be another angry political rant against a popular animated show that everyone likes, where the word woke is thrown around in every second, and where I tell people not to watch it and how terrible it is. But you'd be mistaken. I actually really liked it, even though I mostly disagree with its conclusion about the nature of humanity and technology. This video is not so much a critique of the show, as it is an analysis of what it has to say. If you haven't watched it, I'll let you know when I start getting into spoiler territory, but I'll avoid it for as long as possible to give you a chance to check it out if you feel interested, and I really do recommend it. The show follows the story of Maddie Kim, a young teenage girl suffering from vicious bullying in her school while mourning the recent death of her tech genius father and being raised by her loving but overstressed single mom, as well as the story of Caspian Keys, an edgy older but still adolescent boy who starts to suspect that he's living in a, let's just say, a corporate-controlled environment, to not spoil anything. But the world starts to literally unravel when a digital entity contacts Maddie. It defends her by ruining the lives of her cycle bullies, and basically becomes her only friend, breaking that teenage isolation she was trapped in. This entity only communicates in emojis at first, but Maddie, being a smart cookie, can figure out what it's saying until her mother catches wind of it and is worried that she's talking to some online creeper. Until it's revealed that this entity is the digital mind of her father, who was uploaded and imprisoned in a corporate servers to keep working for his company even after death. And from there, it races on to break free from the egomaniacal big tech oligarchs who want to live forever under the all-consuming legacy of a man called Stephen Holstrom, who died of cancer in the early 2000s. And while all this is going on, other people are being uploaded as well as technology starts being developed by rival governments and corporations. Though some of the uploaded intelligences go rogue, like the character Chanda, the badass Indian programmer with a sympathetic origin story, who's also a great side villain. Technology starts developing at an exponential rate, too fast for society to adapt, which causes instability worldwide, as these digital ghosts start haunting our machines, hijacking drones, escalating wars between nations, and getting unstable due to a flaw in their code. And the only one who's able to set things right is believed to be this genius teen boy Caspian Keys, who is the other main protagonist. Initially, he is a lot more interesting than Maddie, though that quickly changes. Caspian's plotline is definitely more intriguing than Maddie's in Season 1, because he's a tragic figure with a mystery surrounding him. But as the mystery is solved in the first season, and his story progresses, he has a pretty typical messianic plot to his Chosen One character arc. While Maddie's storyline just goes completely off the rails in Season 2, it's amazing, unique, and I love it. Maddie is a great, strong female main character in an era saturated with them. And a version of Maddie even becomes as overpowered a female character as you can get. Way more than any boring boss girl like Captain Marvel or Rey Palpatine or Korra from Avatar. But Maddie as a character gains power via the most tragic way you can imagine, which is why I think she's so unique. I've watched, read, and listened to a lot of fiction in my 30 years of life, but Maddie Kim has to be the single main character I feel the most bad for. Poor Maddie, bro. She deserved better. She deserved real happiness! But I'm getting ahead of myself. What's refreshing about Pantheon is that both main characters complement each other perfectly while enhancing each other's character journeys, instead of competing with each other for the narrative spotlight. Both are oversaturated character types, with Caspian being the chosen one Harry Potter type who learns of his special genetic lineage, and Maddie being the talented Katniss Everdeen type girl trying to save her family from the system. But when they share a story together, it produces a potent combination, as does their eventual romantic coupling, that I found to be refreshingly chill. Although a little uncomfortable, you know, as teen romances always are, especially when sex is involved. Oops, sorry for the mild spoiler, but it's pretty obvious that it was going to happen. The show is full of cathartic elements like this, where it takes cliches and does a little twist on them, which you always wanted to see on screen but never did. Like Maddie's mom threatening to beat the crap out of Maddie's high school sociopathic bully, since normally adults are completely useless in these situations in fiction. Talk about a breath of fresh air. The fights in this show are also insanely creative by the standards of what we normally see on screen. They really take the concept of digital gods to its logical conclusion when these beings clash with each other in cyberspace. But the greatest narrative flaw that Pantheon has as a show is that it betrays its own message in how it ends. Though that just adds to the tragedy of it all, but I'll talk about it when I get into overt spoiler territory later. Pantheon is the greatest existential tragedy I've ever seen, but they kind of overdo it in some scenes. Like when we see the main villain's tragic backstory, which was so random and unnecessary, I simply laughed my ass off when it happened. I don't know. It's just something so forced about it. You know, a car accident in a parking lot.
My first choice ever.
Holy shit, dude.
But I guess it's there to explain the villain's obsession with immortality. Though that wasn't necessary. Egomania was enough. Not every villain needs some backstory tragedy to be evil. The plot of Pantheon revolves around the concept of mind upload, where supposedly the human consciousness is transferred from the physical brain into the digital cloud, in a high-tech attempt at immortality. It's a theoretical concept in the real world with real research labs trying to attempt it. You even have real companies offering to freeze your brain for the day that the tech catches up, which is also a major plot point in the show. But that's the question. Can you capture the soul by reducing consciousness into data and then preserving it digitally? Wait, no, that's not the real question with this theoretical tech. Here's the real question. Is the digital model of a person's brain in a simulation the person himself, or is it just a digital copy? And the objective answer is obvious. It's just a copy, bro. No more than a portrait of something, a model, but just containing more data. That's it. The same way that a statue modeled out of your likeness is not you, a digital model of your brain isn't you either. It's not a genuine way to live forever, but merely to have something floating around cyberspace that says, or might even think, it's you, until the silicon servers decay. However, Pantheon as a story takes the opposite view that I thoroughly disagree with. It seemingly concludes that the so-called uploaded intelligences are in fact genuinely the people who got their brains salami sliced by lasers. But I don't think you can watch that morbid scene where Chanda is forced to be uploaded and not conclude that the poor mother hugger was brutally unalived by science. I mean, just watch the scene and tell me, man, did he survive that process?
Please, for the love of God, please, don't do this. I'll do anything, I'll continue. It will murder cloves of cinnamon. Beautiful.
Now that's what I call India's brain drain.
They literally emptied his skull, bro. No wonder Chanda's digital version went on a genocidal rampage. And in the beginning, if I recall correctly, Chanda does genuinely think that he was unalived and takes revenge for it. It's only later that this digital Chanda settles into his new existence. But in reality, that's not the real Chanda. That's only a digital copy, and the real Chanda is in fact very much dead. If there is one major problem with this show, it's that it deliberately tries to obscure this fact by requiring the death of the original person by destroying their brain in order to generate the digital model, which creates the illusion of continuity. This is disingenuous, since if there was a technological means to scan and model the brain without destroying it and the original person coexisted with the new one in the digital cloud, then it would be obvious that the so-called upload is in fact just a copy. It's like how a friend of mine reminded me some time ago. The character robot in the show Invincible on Amazon Prime is the closest that you can get to this mind upload thing.
You realize this procedure doesn't transfer you to the new body. It creates a copy of your mind. For you, nothing will change. For him, everything will.
But Pantheon as a show hesitates to go there. It hesitates to admit this. It portrays immense technological advances happening in the plot, yet they never figure out how to scan the brain without putting it into a laser blender machine of death. And they do this because the show is sympathetic to the upload idea and this technological path for humanity, so it's too afraid to explore the reality that would debunk its own premise. Because the word upload is a misnomer. In other words, it's a lie. A falsity. You're being bamboozled, I tell you. It's an insult to your intelligence to claim that your intelligence can be uploaded. In reality, your brain is just being scanned and copied. This isn't like Narnia, bro, where you walk through a cosmic wormhole into another world. Even if the show somewhat makes allusions to this, with the Caspian name reference and making the MMORPG fantasy game the de facto place where the so-called uploaded minds hang out. So it gives that feeling that it's like you're entering into a fantasy world.
Like, Narnia. Sorry.
No, you're right. Narnia.
No. But what I really like about this show is the good-natured portrayal of all sides and perspectives of this incredibly important conversation about the future of mankind and technological progress. Even if it's not entirely intellectually honest, it still doesn't demonize anyone, except for maybe Steve Jobs and big tech. My point is that the show depicts corrupt and evil people on both sides of the argument as well as reasonable people. The main characters themselves change from one side to the other, which is actually one of the most unique things about the story. It's not a preachy piece of propaganda.
And the American people are being lied to. This whole upload hysteria is a hoax, plain and simple.
40 days in the wilderness, cut off from the interconnected world they'd come to rely on.
Most of the time, but a genuine story that allows its character and plot to breathe and play themselves out to a point where the narrative actually touches on a universal truth about the human condition that the writers themselves might not be fully aware of, or might be too reluctant to explore. Much of the conflict in this show actually stems from this conversation where characters debate whether the digital copies are in fact the same people they loved or something else entirely, and the debate is made engaging since it's emotionally charged and mostly between a mother and daughter debating whether the father of the family has come back from the dead or not. Then it becomes about whether or not uploaded people are a good thing for society and should keep existing or instead be abandoned to die in digital decay, with Maddie wanting to help them and Caspian worried about World War III and the cloud and wanting to let them all die, only for the two characters to change their opinions and be on the opposite side of the discussion. This kind of thing happens a lot throughout the show, and I thought it brilliantly added an extra dimension to the characters and was a great source of narrative tension that feels very real, because people do change their minds all the time, though sometimes it's quite rushed, like Chanda, almost nuking an entire city of innocent people in season 1, then suddenly developing a conscience for no reason in season 2 with no real lead up to it. But I've been getting dangerously close to spoiler territory already, so warning, warning, we are now entering spoilery waters. Now comes the point where I have to explicitly talk about spoilers in order to fulfill this analysis. So if you find this show interesting, I invite you to check it out on Netflix. You have been warned. Here we go. The show debunks itself by having the Caspian plotline prove that a copy of a person is not a person. I cannot stress enough how the show really wants to believe that mind uploads are possible and that the digital mind of someone is the essence of that person, but in reality the digital model of that someone's mind in a computer is no different from cloning. Caspian Keys is of course revealed to be a clone, a biological clone of the main bad guy Stephen Holstrom. And his entire character journey is meant to prove that he is not Stephen Holstrom, but is in fact his own person. The evil corporation literally tries forcing him to live the exact same life that Holstrom lived, down to experiencing key moments of domestic abuse, to shape his personality, and Caspian still developed as his own man. Very different from Stephen. They are genetically identical, and some people actually see Caspian as being the manifestation of Stephen, at least in the first season. But that view is proven false. So if a biological copy of someone is still their own person, then why is a digital copy not? And it's funny how when Stephen Holstrom is finally uploaded and has his frozen brain sliced up and gets into the digital cloud, the first thing he wants to do is kill Caspian. Precisely because having a copy around removes the illusion that the copy is the continuation of the person.
If Project Caspian succeeds, we won't just be creating a biological clone, but a true double. But in success, after you're uploaded, that double will remain, potentially diluting your sense of self.
You were right. It served its purpose.
I work for you, boss. Give it to me.
The show almost admits this through Maddie, when she has to deal with backup copies of her father and starts to realize that the fact that her father can be spun up in several copies and backups means that they are not her original father, and neither was the first digital version she encountered and loved deeply in season 1.
You can't keep making copies of people. That's not what a person is. That's not my dad. Okay, whatever it is, it doesn't know me, who I am now. Because if it's not, then who's to say the last version was him either? And if that wasn't him, then... Oh my God.
What?
I'm having a think my mother was right moment.
Ugh, the worst.
which is why the end of the story is so incredibly, infinitely tragic. Maddie wasn't the naive teen girl excited for the return of her dead father anymore. And after Caspian, the love of her life, was forced to fry his brain, she realized how physical death is an issue and became personally against mind upload. Meanwhile, her aging mother drank the tech cult Kool-Aid and shredded her own brain so that a copy of herself could live in the cloud and pretend to be Maddie's mom. But Maddie naturally didn't engage much with this copy and becomes the leader of the humans, still sensible enough not to commit collective self-destruction to the Silicon system. And meanwhile, her son grows up to be a true believer in the cult and wants to shred his brain as soon as possible, but Maddie uses her parental authority to try to preserve his life as long as possible until she learns that her so-called digital sister is going behind her back trying to accelerate her son's self-deletion before he becomes an independent adult, which of course causes Maddie to shut that thing away from her life, only for the copy of her one true love, Caspian, seemingly coming back from the dead into her life, confusing her emotionally, only for him to die again after a massive AI Terminator-style uprising accidentally caused by pro-human terrorists, and then her son gets shot and dies in her arms while the disembodied face of the love of her life says something strange about how she will only be happy 1,000 years in the future before shutting down forever. Understandably, that horrific event makes her go nuts, and she finally puts her brain in the laser blender and generates a copy of herself at the cost of her self-destruction. And that copy of herself is forever defined by that one traumatic event. Then, the digital copy of herself goes off alone to a deserted corner of the galaxy and builds a Dyson sphere so she can generate countless simulated universes, all for the purpose of recreating that moment of her trauma, to seek a closure of 1,000 years in the making. In the end, even the copy of herself is alone and isolated by the technology that she is a manifestation of, and she can't even interact much with the simulated copies of her own loved ones from her fake universes without them breaking down after a while. They don't last long outside their simulations, according to the dialogue. And in the end, she chooses to immerse herself into one of those universes to relive her teenage years when she met Caspian, the love of her life. But in reality, all she's doing is reliving that cycle of trauma over and over again, never moving on, refusing to move on. But even then, none of that is real anyway, because that's not the real Maddie. It's a screenshot of her severely traumatized neurons after she scrambled her brain due to a horrific experience when all she loved most died before her eyes. It's why that version of Maddie feels eternal pain for something that happened 1,000 years ago, because she's a screenshot of those damaged, traumatized neurons. It's horrifically tragic. It also betrays the show's main message, which is that reality is other people. The show says how it's all about our interactions with people that make life worth living. But then Maddie ends up alone in the Dyson sphere, obsessed with her memories, experiencing pain over and over. And she deserved better. Justice for Maddie! Especially since Maddie Kim becomes the one sane character in her crazy world by the end there. I love her. It's like they designed this character to be the strong female character specifically to appeal to me. She's insanely based, refusing abortion and raising her son, and helping to save the world from an evil post-human tech cult obsessed with progress, and wanting to preserve humanity. But it's just pretty tragic that she loses in the end. What was most frustrating to me about this show was that they don't explore the best arguments against mind uploading as a concept, which would prove it to be false. And Caspian, the genius clone fighting for his own identity, should know that it's total bunk. But in the end, the bad guy, Stephen Holstrom, was right within the narrative of the show. The bad guy wins.
I thought we stopped him.
Caspian, you did. These people didn't upload under pressure of a pandemic. You stopped Holstrom. Evolution tends to move at its own pace, but it's always in motion. No one can stop the future, even someone determined to bring it about.
Because the show is progressive and believes that the future has an inevitable outcome, much like the bad guy. It's revealing in that scene where Maddie faces her simulation sister and says,
"Help kill my son?"
And the blue-haired digital waifu Lolly says,
"You can't stop the future, Maddie."
And the digital people are seen as more ethical and enlightened than the humans in the show, which again is annoying. Holstrom, who was obsessed with the idea of a false paradise of digital post-human silicon copies of people, got what he wanted in the end, because what he wanted was inevitable due to historical and economic forces. What he wanted is portrayed as a good thing. It was only his psychopathic methods that are condemned, but the show was also drinking the Kool-Aid all along. Which makes sense though, because apparently Jim Jones was a progressive left-wing type. That's just banter, bro. Which is awkward because the show clearly states that the big tech guys are part of the destructive progressive techno-personality cult around the company founder.
Not every prophet gets to see the promised land. Jesus. Moses, actually. I mean, you sound like a cult member.
Oh, I am. So is Renee. We all were. And with good reason. There is such a thing as singular genius, Caspian.
And are obsessed with bringing about the future at the cost of humanity, only for their cultish beliefs to win out. And this is partly due to capitalism. Profit incentives causes short-term thinking, which leads to societal self-deletion. Since the so-called uploaded intelligences are more efficient workers and economic agents.
I remember a world terrified of you eyes. What changed that?
Money.
Which is funny because there's literally a communist guy on the show who thinks this technology will finally bring the Marxist utopia. But even in digital paradise, you need to grind and accumulate tokens. And those that can't have to be frozen in stasis because there's not enough energy for everyone. Again, the show is definitely progressive, but it's well written and allows the story to explore ideas and both sides of an argument, at least to a limited extent. That's the difference between a woke show, dare I say, and one that is just progressive. Because it's not the progressive values themselves that make a show or story bad, even if I don't agree with them. It's okay if someone writes a progressive story, I got no problem with that. It's that woke shows tend to hate the audience and have terrible writing where the plot and characters aren't genuine but are just a series of talking points pretending to be a story. Which is not the case with Pantheon, not by a long shot. Like most mainstream media products, Pantheon has clearly progressive liberal values in its narrative. It takes a clear position on the COVID fiasco and had a Republican versus Democrat scene that had me rolling my eyes for a second there. Like most non-Americans, I think both political factions are silly billies. But it's fine because it's a show about current events, although it shines best when it focuses on its themes of family, humanity, and technological advancement. But when I call this show progressive, I'm not referring to the political positions in the culture war, but the philosophical progressive theory of history, where the technological and social change is always an improvement and that an exponential growth towards human ascension is inevitable. The general idea of the show seems to be that you can't stop the future, Maddie, and I call it a self-destruction cult because if progress is about change and overcoming limits at all costs, then eventually humanity itself is seen as something to overcome. When you apply progressivism to biology, it leads to an assumption that human extinction, by it being replaced by something more evolved, is both inevitable and good. As a result, it creates people that fetishize technology and believe that humans exist to facilitate technological advancement, and not that technological advancement exists to facilitate human existence. As technology becomes more powerful, we start to realize the importance of tradition. Because we humans ourselves are tradition, because tradition is the act of transferring information from one generation to another, and that includes the information of our DNA. A digital copy of our genetic and neural information is a break from that genetic line. It's not a genuine continuation. Humans are biological beings. A digital being is not human by definition, but something else. Too much change is basically death, and changing humans from biological beings to digital is the destruction of human beings. And this progressive idea of modernity is a self-defeating paradox, which is why we're in postmodern times. Because the progressive idea that we must move beyond tradition into a new mode of thinking eventually becomes the traditional way of thinking after a few generations. And therefore, moving beyond tradition means we must move beyond the idea that we must move beyond tradition. In any case, it's ginormous hubris on the part of the tech cult to believe that they can capture and preserve human consciousness forever when they can't even define or know what consciousness even is. And they promote the destruction of the body and the superiority of silicon and encourage countless people to self-deletion because they think or they wish that we are perfectly reducible to data that they can control in their silicon systems. And I'm like, man, screw you, bro. You're not trapping me in the system, man. But even technological progress can't escape tradition, as traditional ideas and religious schools of thought are the only way to express the potential of technology. Like the idea of digitally obtaining immortal life in a luminescent new mode of existence in a new heavens and new earth paradise, created in the end of days. The inherent similarity of this concept with that of the afterlife means Pantheon offers a spiritual and even theological discussion, just as much as a technological and scientific one, as these subjects begin to merge into one. Because it postulates on what makes up the essence of a person, which is traditionally called the soul, and it reflects on the power to create entire worlds, which is traditionally called godhood. Because tech has reached a point where mystical language is important to explain its potential. Especially when we get at the simulation hypothesis, which is the belief that whoever created our universe is simulated in some giant computer is basically God. And if we're also making simulations of our own, then we're made in the image of this God. God is a nerd programmer just like me, says the Silicon Valley nerd. The more tech evolves, the more we realize how godlike our intelligence is. And the more realistic our virtual worlds become in our computers, the more we consider the possibility that our own universes was made by a similar intelligence. I talk more about this in my Why is Sci-Fi So Religious video. Pantheon as a show is just following in the footsteps of other great sci-fi classics, with its constant biblical references and ruminations on the soul. It uses the word soul to refer to the digital copies of people's brains, perhaps as a metaphor at first, but there's a reason why it fits so well. When people think of the soul, they often think of wispy, formless, white fart that emanates the body, like in Dark Souls. But in reality, the traditional Western idea of soul is the form, the design of the body, the outline, as well as the intellect and willpower. The soul is in part the design of the body itself, containing the essential information that guides the material of the body into the shape of the person. So the idea in Pantheon of capturing the information in the body and following that design in the digital world is not far off. It's analogous even in that conceptual regard. But the soul is not reducible to mere information. But the show, in many ways, is also about the idea of the salvation of the soul, and it heavily uses Christian ideas to talk about that. Because the uploaded people are doomed to decay and disintegrate, and both Stephen Holstrom and Caspian Keys are analogous to the devil and Christ, who offer two different paths to human ascension. Maddie literally calls Stephen Holstrom the devil, so they make this analogy obvious. Holstrom's solution literally turns his followers into demon-looking things. But it's more than that. You see, in Christianity, both Christ and Lucifer offer the promise of human ascension into godlike status. Many critics of Christianity think it's about keeping humans small and ignorant to obey a controlling God, but that's completely wrong. As St. Athanasius once said, God became man so that man could become God. Christ offers us the true promise to become like God through love and our relationship with Him and with others, which is similar to what Caspian realizes as the solution to digital decay and eternal life in the show, which is a relationship to other people. The solution to the flaw in the code of the uploaded intelligences is other people.
Just gotta grab a sample of this code, isolate the recursive components, and build a love machine.
Uniting with other people. While Lucifer offers us the false promise of becoming like God through knowledge and selfishness, which involves rebellion against the natural order, which is something the show explores.
So this is about revenge.
Enlightenment.
You think yourself humanity's salvation, but you're its apocalypse.
Apocalypsis. Uncovering the revelation of great knowledge.
The very beginning of the show is a monologue scene about comparative mythology and how creation stories are typically about younger created gods rebelling and killing older creator gods and replacing them, implying that we humans did the same to the gods and that the human created technological beings that will emerge after us will do the same to us and rebel against us. The Abrahamic religions are one of the only creation stories, with the possible exception of Hinduism, where the main original god is not overthrown by his rebellious children, but in fact defeats the rebellion, which is why it has the best outlook for human technological development. If we don't want the digital creations made in our image to rebel against us, then we should not rebel against our own creator, or in the very least not glorify rebellions or revolution as a key part of our modern culture, so that these concepts and ideas of revolution aren't reflected upon artificial and autonomous intelligences that we train our written ideas on. This revolutionary nature of the progressive worldview that sees the newer as better eventually leads to a fetishization of a post-human era, because the new robot will inherently be seen as better than the old, obsolete human, the fossils, the passé, the antiquated. And change for the sake of change leads to destruction, since there is no greater form of change than destruction. We should not forget that progress without purpose is literally cancer. That's how cancer works. Cancer is the most progressive thing, man. Deep. But I say this not because I'm in favor of a stagnant humanity. It's not about shutting down progress and trying to go back to the past. It's about not hastily choosing the wrong future. Any post-human future that says that we're doomed for extinction and doomed to be fossils because we can't stop the future, which is the belief preached by Maddie's son and her so-called digital sister in the show, is the wrong view. We humans used to use our imagination to imagine the fulfillment of humanity's potential. As much as I make fun of Star Trek, its optimistic humanism, where some technological development like eugenics on the Borg stuff is outlawed in order to promote more human-affirming technologies that empowers human beings instead of replacing us, is in fact the correct approach. Star Trek's only issue is that secularism isn't enough to satisfy the human spirit, which I discuss more in my Dune vs. Star Trek video. And the religious language, used by the believers in the technological singularity and post-human digital civilizations, so eloquently articulated in the show Pantheon, kind of demonstrates this. But I've said enough for today. Thank you all for listening to my ramblings. Have a good day, my friends.